With the Pat Robertson fiasco kind of receding into the past, one of the things that I found most interesting about it, as I've mentioned in a previous video, is the fact that there's a lot of people out there willing to apologize for Pat Robertson's take on the entire affair. He said something which is quite patently irrational, that you would assume any sane person would reject automatically, but there's a number of people out there who are quite willing to go on the record as saying, yes, what he's saying is right. Now, this kind of leads me to question what exactly power is. What kind of hold does this man have on his followers that makes them say things like this, where you would normally think that anyone with a grain of common sense would simply say, okay, I have to disagree with Pat Robertson on this one. Most Christians actually have said so, but he does have his apologists and his adherents out there who are actually coming to his aid. Religious groups who are successful in imposing their view of the world on people often have a godlike or a sort of leader that the adherents get their view of reality from, or they hope that they get their view of reality from that person. So in a way, they're abdicating their free will. In a way, Pat Robertson has managed to, at least in my reading of the situation, subvert the free will of the people that follow him. Now, this is a type of unliberty which I don't think that we really value a great deal, or that we may underestimate. We all know that we can coerce people by arresting them, by beating them up, by frightening them, by killing them. Even we can coerce everyone else by simply removing the notoriously difficult people. But the subtle coercive element in dictatorship, I think, is undervalued, or the subtle coercive element in society itself. Where I live, there's a large number of Mennonites and Hutterites. They're the German-speaking quietists, Christian quietists, whose ancestors emigrated from Russia around the turn of the 20th century. And they generally don't bother anyone. They're Christian fundamentalists, but they're people more or less like them. They don't ruthlessly try to propagate their faith or anything, and they keep a fairly disciplined society. And people say, well, look, you don't see Hutterites or Mennonites shoplifting or drunk in the streets or that sort of thing, because they are able to actually discipline themselves. And the discipline is invariably subtle. They don't believe in actual overt coercion. Their faith seems to actually go against it, quietism, Anabaptism, I suppose. But they have all kinds of coercive methods, such as shunning, which is a terrible, awful fate to befall one of these Anabaptists, to be excluded from the community, which has echoes actually in Japanese society. And my understanding is that a lot of, say, Hasidic Jewish people, or a lot of rigid religious minorities, have this kind of means of coercing their members and bringing them to heel. Now, I find that just as awful, if you ask me, as throwing someone in jail or torturing them. Power is of the mind, and coercion is of the mind, and suffering is of the mind. So if you threaten someone with something that they simply cannot handle, a Japanese person to be excluded from the group would probably have the same reaction as I would have to be thrown in jail or exiled to Siberia or whatever. It's just an unendurable thing to happen to someone. So that's coercion just like anything else. It's coercion just like putting somebody in a torture chamber. And now this doesn't even begin to look at the other aspects of subtle power and mental coercion. What about the good stuff? Well, if you look at certain leaders, mostly in the 20th century, but in other cases, say Martin Luther King, Mohandas Gandhi, many other ones, Desmond Tutu, these people really didn't occupy any actual positions of authority. They didn't command any armies. They didn't have the police to impose their will. But what they did was they managed to convince everybody that they were godlike people, extremely moral people, and they managed to worm their way, as it were, into their followers' souls and, in a way, deprive them of their free will. People blindly followed what Gandhi said. They were willing to have him make their moral choices for them. And they were willing to accept his view of good and evil. To a lesser extent, Martin Luther King had that authority. I can't get it out of my head that Martin Luther King was somehow more moral than the rest of us. And I wasn't even born when the civil rights issues were going on. It's just what I've heard about the guy and the way that he's portrayed and the aura that he casts even from beyond the grave it still affects me. So these people are able in a subtle way to influence my behavior and affect my willpower, my free will, in ways that actually I tend to actually want to agree with. That's power, just like any other. And this can be done for evil, of course. We all know about how Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin subverted the wills of their subjects. They were both loved by their people, even as they oppressed them. Joseph Stalin is the obvious case. He killed them by the millions, but one of the ugly and bizarre aspects of history is the Russians loved Joseph Stalin. He was wildly popular, and the grief was genuine when he died, even though he was the most ruthless, iron-fisted dictator perhaps in human history. Because he was able to make himself into a god in the eyes of his subjects. He was able to make people believe that he was God. You even mention the name Adolf Hitler to this day, and we tend to mystify him and think that he was evil incarnate. To a certain extent, we do the same thing today with Osama bin Laden. Both of these people were human beings. They both had flatulence. They both know what it is to have an orgasm. I presume that they do. They both probably like to eat food. They use the toilet. They're human beings just like anyone else, but we have made them into something beyond what they are. And in a way, just like the Russians who bought into Stalin's divinity, we are buying into the divinity of Adolf Hitler, Osama bin Laden, or anyone else that we fear, even George W. Bush. So not all power is overt. And if we don't really take this into consideration, we run the risk actually of being oppressed, as it were, by the back door. Being oppressed even though we don't even realize that it's happening, or giving away our free will willingly to someone whom we believe actually merits it. That's Unliberty as well. Thank you.